Hi, this is Maria Olson. You may know me from Trophy Heads or Starry Eyes and maybe Paranormal Activity 3. And I want to welcome you to Anthony T's Horror Show because it's an awesome show.
Hi, my name is Jessica Cameron, and you're listening to Anthony T's Horror Show.
Hey, fellow horror fans. This is Troy Escamilla, the director of Party Night and Mrs. Claus, and you are listening to Anthony T's Horror Show. Enjoy.
Welcome to another edition of Anthony T's Horror Show. I'm Anthony T. It's the 50th episode of Anthony T's Horror Show. In this episode, I will be talking to cult filmmaker J.R. Brookwater as we talk about Ozone, which was recently re-released on Blu-ray for the first time. This film is definitely, in my opinion, the greatest shot on video film ever made. This is a very long interview, so it will be next segment, because this is probably one of the longest interviews that I've done on this podcast. It's definitely the longest solo interview that I've done, because this is over 50 minutes long. And this is, I think, one of the best interviews I've done. So you'll be hearing that next segment. But first, I have to talk about something that I really need to get off my chest. I recently saw a trailer where I really need to see this film so bad. Only problem is, it's debuting in theaters, and I am not going near a theater anytime soon. But I'm so excited to see this film once it comes out on disc, because I've seen the first trailer for Christopher Nolan's new film, Freaky. Now, if you don't know who Christopher Nolan is, he's the director behind the Happy Death Day films. But that's not why I really want to see Freaky. The film is being produced by none other than Jason Blum. But he's not the reason why I really want to see Freaky so bad. The main reason I want to see Freaky so bad is it stars Vince Vaughn. That's right, Vince Vaughn. The comedian who's been in such great comedies as Swingers, Old School, and Wedding Crashers. Definitely check out those films. In the film, Vince Vaughn plays a serial killer who swaps bodies with a 17-year-old girl, and you guessed it, chaos and murders ensue. This looks like a return to form for Vince Vaughn, because I'm a fan of his work. He is a very funny comedian. I like the fact that he's doing a horror comedy, because this film looks like vintage Vince Vaughn. And I really cannot wait to see this film when it hits disc or VOD. But this film will be hitting theaters November 13th, if the theaters is still open then. And that's a big if right now, because after the way Christopher Nolan's Tenet bombed at the box office, it was supposed to be this big movie that was going to bring back a lot of moviegoers, and it hasn't happened. Look at what happened after Tenet bombed big time at the box office. Candyman, we were expecting that film to come out next month. Now it's off the release schedule, meaning you'll see it sometime in 2021. As we horror fans are going to go a full year without a big-time horror film, because A Quiet Place Part 2 moved to 2021. Spiral from the Book of Saw moved to 2021. Halloween Kills moved to 2021. Now, Candyman reboot moved to 2021, and there's been no date to when that's coming out. So I'm saying this with caution that Freaky might not be out November 13th, but it is scheduled to be in theaters November 13th. I wouldn't bet on it, considering the fact that I'm expecting the next James Bond movie to be pushed back to 2021. Wonder Woman 84 got pushed back to Christmas. At this point, don't expect anything to come out the rest of the year. Now, Freaky will probably come out, I would think, unless if the theaters close down again, due to the fact that there is no new films coming out. I've got this feeling that Freaky will either A, be pushed back to 2021, or end up on VOD, because I just don't see it coming in theaters November 13th. I could be wrong, but the way Tenet performed at the box office, don't assume Freaky's coming out November 13th, because we all assumed Candyman was coming out next month until Tenet came out, and now everything's in a state of flux in regards to the film schedule, because you'll probably see more films be pushed back to 2021. But then again, it could happen. But I would take that November 13th release date with a grain of salt, because honestly, I don't even think theaters will be open in November, because I got a feeling Black Widow and the next James Bond film are going to be pushed back to 2021. I just got that feeling. But take the November 13th date with a grain of salt, because it could happen. But I want to get your hopes up. Not after the way Christopher Nolan's Tenet performed over Labor Day weekend.
Welcome to Dark Discussions, your place for the discussion of horror film, fiction, and all that's fantastic. A weekly podcast where the discussion is about the most recent horror and genre films. Intelligent talk on a genre that deserves intelligence. A conversation between co-hosts discussing not only the film, but also the connotation that the directors and screenwriters are trying to articulate. When you want more than a review, listen to Dark Discussions.
And speaking of perception, there's just one more scene I want to talk about, which is after Caleb discovers that Kyoto's a robot. Kyoto kind of peels off her skin, showing him what's underneath.
Now, wait a minute. I know where you're going with this, but tell me you weren't already thinking this 15 minutes earlier in the film. Exactly what he's thinking at that moment.
Which is he's a robot, too.
Oh, I considered the possibility.
Right, and that's what I like, is the fact that the writers were smart enough to know that this is what the audience would be thinking.
We've all seen Blade Runner.
Right, exactly.
www.darkdiscussions.com, wherever podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Anthony T's Horror Show. I am here with legendary underground filmmaker J.R. Brookwater, as his 1994 film Ozone recently was re-released on Blu-ray through Tempe Digital. How you doing today, J.R.?
I'm very good, Anthony. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
First question, how did you get into filmmaking?
Well, you want to go back to like the short film days, how my first inspirations there, or how I made my first feature? Which way are you looking to go there?
Talk about the short film days, because we don't hear that a lot.
Okay, sure. Well, I had growing up, I had a number of influences, and it was probably more science fiction. I was into Godzilla and Ultraman and all these different things, but the one horror influence that I had was Dark Shadows. And then, of course, when Star Wars came out in 1977, I was the perfect age. I was 11 years old, and that was sort of a life-changing experience, as it was for, thousands, if not millions, of kids in that age bracket. But what I did that was probably different than a lot of them is I actually took the little Star Wars action figures from Kenner and started making little animated short films with my friends. We made our own Star Wars sequels. I mean, keep in mind, these were really like poor, badly animated stop motion animation stuff. But it was, that was the learning experience. That's how we learned how to shoot and edit and light and all that kind of stuff. But then that eventually led back to horror because during the same time period that I was starting on the shorts, the first issue of Fangoria magazine came out and had this big color spread on Dawn of the Dead with all these really graphic, gory pictures, and that sort of triggered something inside me to where suddenly then it was like running around seeing how much ketchup I could spray on the neighbors, and making these little blood and guts short films. So throughout my junior high and high school years, that's what I did. I eventually, under the influence of MTV, wound up doing a lot of music videos of songs that I liked and things like that. It just anything that I could be shooting stuff on the weekend when I wasn't in school and just sort of learning the whole thing. But that ultimately is what sort of paved the way for me to do my first feature.
Speaking of your first feature, The Dead Next Door, not a lot of people might not know this, but the film was co-financed by legendary horror director Sam Raimi. How were you able to get Sam Raimi to fund your film somewhat?
Well, I think the main reason that it happened is because I didn't actually approach him to finance a movie. My motivation was to just go up to Detroit, which was only 4 hours north of Akron, Ohio, where I was born and raised. And I thought, that's not that far. I could go and I could get a job as a production assistant or whatever. So I looked up the office. I think I called directory assistants to get Renaissance Pictures in Ferndale, Michigan, and left a message on their answering machine. And much to my surprise, a few days later, I got a call from Sam Raimi, which, this would never happen now, but this you're talking about, 1985 or whatever, and these things did happen at the time. And we talked for a few minutes, and he said, "Oh yeah, it'd be great to have you come up and we'll talk and see if we can get you on board in some capacity." And so then he hands the phone over to Bruce Campbell, and Bruce was the guy in charge of hiring crew and stuff at that point. He was coordinating the production, and so I talked to him for a little bit and scheduled a meeting, went up there and met them in person and brought along my Super 8 projector and a selection of short films that I had done on Super 8 film. And so we talked for a little bit. We went in the next room and turned the lights down, turned the short films on. It was just Sam and I started showing him the stuff, and he's like, wait, I got to bring the guys in here. So this whole audience of people comes in, Josh Becker and Scott Spiegel and Rob Tappert and Bruce Campbell, they were basically all there. And he has me start again, and he starts, we start showing these short films again. And long story short, he just, he was like, "Oh, we would absolutely, love to have you work on this." But he's like, "I don't understand why you don't just make your own feature." This is how he kind of framed it to me. And I said, "Well, I mean, of course I want to, but I was kind of the George Romero school where I thought, well, I'll just work doing industrials or music videos or just whatever, to try and get my foot in the door, and that would come in time eventually." And he basically said, "Look, if you get something together, let me know, let me read it. I might kick some money in." So basically on the 4-hour drive back is where I essentially came up with the harebrained scheme of doing The Dead Next Door and sent him an investment memorandum and, the basic story outline and all that kind of stuff. Within the space of a few weeks, he basically agreed to do it. Now, at the time, it was a much smaller, we were going to shoot it on VHS video, and it was going to be done for, a few $1,000s or whatever. But, of course, mushroomed into a much larger thing that wound up consuming the next 4 years of my life.
You also, along your career, got to work with the Charles Band. How did you become involved with Full Moon Features?
Well, that actually, ironically, that does sort of tie back to Dead Next Door, even though there was a large gap of time between the two, because I had learned over the course of doing Dead Next Door and the other movies that happened after that, I became somewhat proficient in post-production, which is the process of editing and sound and all that kind of stuff. And it's a process that a lot of filmmakers don't fully embrace. They think they should be on the set saying action and cut and telling actors what to do and whatever. But for me, the post was always sort of almost the more fascinating part of it, because here you bring this footage and then you have to kind of breathe new life into it. You have a second opportunity to make it better, and through the editing and sound and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, I had been doing that on my own movies and a little bit for other filmmakers at the time, and I had there was two guys from Wisconsin who had come out to L.A. when I had moved out there to finish a film called Sleepwalker, which was later released by Full Moon as Vengeance of the Dead. And that was a 16 millimeter show, and they were basically just finishing it in my living room using the equipment that I had to do all, my other shows at the time. And Dave Dakota, who was, had started with Charlie Band and had gone on to, his own career, was in the process of starting some movies with Full Moon again. And now this was right after Full Moon had lost their Paramount deal, and they were kind of back out on their own again. And he was going to make a movie called Shrieker, and he saw all this activity going on and said, hey, would you be interested in editing and doing the sound mix for this 35 millimeter anamorphic movie called Shrieker? And I'm like, sure. I had just moved to LA, a few months before that, and was certainly looking for work at the time. So nobody really at Full Moon knew who I was. I was some guy in the valley, cutting this movie. And I think Dave wanted to make sure that it was going to turn out okay before he told anybody who I was or what was going on. But long story short, I cut that show, wound up doing the final cut with Charlie and Dave and Charlie's father, Albert Band. They were very happy with it, and in short order we went ahead and did the sound work. They were very happy with that. We wound up doing some computer generated effects. They were happy with that. And then I got asked to edit Curse of the Puppet Master, which was the next film that Dave was shooting for them. And basically after that, it was kind of a 5-year blur. Essentially what happened is I, within the space of a few months, wound up supervising all of the post-production on all of their movies. And they were doing, tons of movies. They were doing kids movies, horror movies. They were doing these erotic, like softcore erotic things for this label, Surrender Cinema. I mean, there were so many movies coming out of that studio at that time. It was just sort of insane, and it literally blossomed to where I had a team of like 20 guys working for me, and that's kind of what led back to making movies again. I took a break to do all this post-production stuff, and then wound up making some stuff for Full Moon. And that's sort of the long version of how that all came about.
Speaking of making films for Full Moon Features, how did Charles Band entrust you to direct Witch House 2?
It actually wasn't Witch House 2. When I went to meet with him, we had been talking about doing something called Fear.com, which was later shot as Horror Vision. And that was the movie we were supposed to make. I had found a guy named Scott Phillips, who was a screenwriter friend that was working for me at Full Moon. And I had enlisted him to write the script and had worked with him on it. And so I got called into this meeting thinking we're going to make this movie. And what happened is the first Witch House had come out some months earlier and had done really, really good, like unexpectedly good through, the rentals through Hollywood Video and Blockbuster Video, which were the predominant markets at that point. And so he just sort of out of nowhere says, would you be interested in going to Romania and making Witch House 2? And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess. I was like, why not? I was like, what about this other thing? He's like, well, we'll do that next. Well, let's do this one first. So that was what he needed, I guess, at the time. He just wanted to strike while the iron was hot. And, the Blair Witch Project, of course, had come out, and that had during that point where Witch House was in video stores. And I think that contributed a lot. People were had kind of witch fever, wanted to see movies like that. But there had been other projects. I mean, he had a series of like kids horror movies called Film Monsters, where they would do like The Werewolf Reborn and Frankenstein Reborn. And one of the ones that I was supposed to do was The Mummy Reborn. And I had actually worked with the screenwriter, Doug Snoffer, who would later write Witch House 2. And we had basically had that thing pretty much ready to go. I mean, we were just starting to cast it and all that kind of stuff when he kind of pulled the plug on that whole series. I think they never got past Werewolf and Frankenstein. But so it was, I think, part of when he lured me in to supervise the post-production, he sort of had promised that he would throw a movie or two at me down the road. And that's kind of how Charlie works. I mean, once you get in his circle of trust, he's, very free with, letting you have opportunities. And he's very good about that. I mean, he's got a long history of people, Ted Nicolau and David Schmoller and all these people who have, worked their way up through the ranks with him. So that part didn't really surprise me. I knew eventually I was probably going to make something for him. It was just Witch House 2 was kind of an unexpected surprise because it wasn't the project that I was expecting to make first.
Now, the film sequel, Witch House 3, I heard maybe years ago that Charles wanted to like repurpose a film, and you said no?
Well, it wasn't so much that I said no. What it was, he was thinking about, because at this point the company had kind of downsized a little bit. There were, the budgets were shrinking, the market was shrinking. So he was looking for a cheaper way to do it. And it's not that we had spent so much money on the second Witch House, but he thought, well, there's still enough life in this. Let's see if we can pick up an existing movie. And this movie had fallen into his lap. And honestly, I can't remember the name of it now. I think it was called The Coven or something like that. I can't remember what the original. I mean, it's probably in the liner notes of the Witch House 3 DVD. But he asked me to watch it because he wanted to know technically if it was sound enough for him to distribute. I think he just probably watched it on fast forward and that was it. And said we could just retitle this Witch House 3. And so I took it home and watched it. And I think it had been shot in one of the video 3D kind of things or whatever. And so there was some discussion of whether or not the technical quality was there. Well, I watched it and I thought, well, it's not the worst movie ever made, but I just felt like for the money he was talking about paying it for it, on top of like having to put this film look process, which was very expensive at the time, to make it look more filmic, for all that money that he was going to put into it, I felt like we could just make a Witch House 3. So I actually mentioned this to his right-hand man, Mickey Kaiserman, who was kind of the guy that did the day-to-day stuff there. And next thing I know, that was like a Friday night or whatever. And Monday morning, I get called into Charlie's office. He's like, what's this? You want to just go make Witch House 3? He's like, you can do it for this kind of money? And I'm like, sure, not even really thinking. It was kind of just off the cuff. And so anyways, that's what we wound up doing. It wound up being like some $15,000, shot on DV cam sequel, which, again, these things just sort of happen. It's not like you're planning them or anything else. But and then the other movie, that's just the funny thing is the other movie had actually starred Tanya Dempsey as well, and Tanya Dempsey was somebody that I had my eye on that I wanted to use in one of the films that we were doing. So I wound up casting her in that movie. So one way or another, I guess there was going to be a Witch House 3 with Tanya Dempsey starring in the movie. Kind of funny how that works.
Yeah, I really loved both Witch House 2 and Witch House 3 because
oh, good, thanks.
They were very different from what the post-Paramount Full Moon films were.
Well, that's what we were trying to do. I mean, and the thing I didn't really want to make, especially doing two sequels to a movie that I didn't do in the first place, I just was trying to do something different each time. I mean, they both have Lilith in them and they're both about witches, but and even the style is very different. One is shot in Romania, very gothic looking. The other one's sort of grittier, more sort of to my shot on video roots, just down and dirty, shot in LA, stealing locations, that kind of stuff. So they both have a very different look and feel, and the casts and everything else. So, but I kind of like that. I didn't feel like there needed to be a continual thread, from the first movie.
All right, let's now move on to your film Ozone, which is recently re-released. Actually, was released on Blu-ray for the first time.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Tell everyone about the film.
Well, that is kind of goes backwards to when I was sort of, I had just come off of 6 shot-on-video movies that were made over a 7-month period for Cinema Home Video, and it was sort of a soul-crushing experience. We're talking about 1991, early 1992, when this happened, and I was just kind of looking to sort of go back to my roots, of how I had made stuff. When I started out on Dead Next Door, I felt like I had a lot of time and a lot of effort and care was put into stuff, and I didn't just want to just make something just to throw it out there. I wanted to, do something where I could. It sounds egotistical, but I just wanted to just craft something that would be a little bit special, maybe. So I was sort of like meandering after I had made these movies, and these 2 guys that had worked for me early on the Dead Next Door kind of came out of nowhere with this script called Ozone. And the one guy, Dave Wagner, who wrote the script, had his intention was to make it himself, and he had actually scraped together a little bit of money and shot the opening scene just as kind of a test. But I think in doing that, he sort of realized, man, this is a lot of work, and I don't know if I want to do all this work. So they were looking to me just to kind of like figure out if I could help them in some way, or help get it made, or just, I don't know that they had a clear idea at the time. But I was driving out west to a Fangoria Weekend of Horror show to sell VHS tapes or whatever. And I went with another guy who was one of the crew who worked with me. So I wasn't driving at the time, and I read the script. And it was the one time that I had sort of just saw the entire thing almost from beginning to end without, the whole vision of it just came into my head, I guess, is for better or worse. And so I thought, I really want to, I want to see this get made. But I went back to them and said, hey, why don't, would you be willing to just let me make it, and I'll direct it, and you guys can, pitch in and help produce it, and we'll just get it made together. We'll take your resources, and I'll kick in what I have, and, the cameras and the lights and whatever else that I had. So anyways, they agreed to it. And so that's how it wound up happening. And I enlisted James Black and Tom Hoover and a number of other people who had been in these less than spectacular six-pack of movies that preceded it. And, and we just sort of set out to make something that was a little bit different. And the basic gist of the movie is a cop gets injected with this new street drug and starts to sort of see delusions of, he's not sure what's real or what's imagined. And he loses his partner in the process of a kind of a stakeout gone bad. And so throughout the course of the movie, he's trying to find his partner, but at the same time, he's being sort of harassed by these drug mutants that are sort of taking over the city, essentially. So that's kind of the short version of it.
I first discovered the film at Hollywood Video back in the day, where video stores existed under the title Street Zombies.
Yes.
Why did the film get retitled for home video release?
Well, it was originally released as Ozone in the early 1994, and that was the VHS release from Tempe Video, and it did very well under the circumstances, but then it just sort of faded out of over time. It just VHS had fallen a little bit out of vogue. DVD was in, all that kind of stuff, and once I had partnered up with Charlie Band and was doing all that stuff with him, my idea was I was actually going to remaster the movie for a DVD for a special edition DVD on my own, but I sort of flipped him a copy of it and said, hey, check this out if you think it. He was looking for other things to put out, and I had kind of encouraged him to resurrect the Wizard Video label, which was a very popular label, back in the late 80s that he had. I can't remember if we had done, I think we had already done Skinned Alive through there. Skinned Alive was the first one that we had done, and then he was looking to do more because that one had done okay business. So I said, well, why don't you check out this Ozone thing? He's like, yeah, I think we can do some business with this. I cut a new trailer, fancied it up a little bit, redid some of the old CGI, all that kind of stuff. But his one request was, we had to put new artwork on it. He didn't like the old artwork, and I can't blame him because the market had changed, and he wanted to retitle it. Now, his reasoning for retitling it is not purely because he didn't like the title. It's just at that point in time, the buyers for these Hollywood Video and Blockbuster and these companies were actually using tools like the Internet Movie Database. They would look these titles up. If something crossed their desk and they looked interesting, they would look it up to make sure it hadn't been released before. So if they had looked up Ozone and saw Ozone 1994, that would have been it. There would have been no deal. So if in calling it Street Zombies with new packaging, the buyer had no idea what they were, just looking at the trailer, they're looking at the artwork and the title going, yep, looks good to us. Let's take, X number of units or whatever. So that's kind of the story of how it happened. I mean, obviously from a creative standpoint, I was, a little bit anguished by it and not a fan of the idea. But at the same time, I knew that I was putting out my own special edition DVD that would have all the extras and it would be under the original title. So to me, it was okay. I was more focused on, the market for my own Tempe DVD release than I was that one. But, people like you found it and other, many other people found it. And I think it sort of elevated that little movie to another level because so many people discovered it after. I mean, there was the crowd that kind of discovered it originally when it came out on VHS, and then there's the crowd that discovered it as Street Zombies. My philosophy is the more eyeballs that see it, the better.
The film has a great performance by James Black. What made you think that he would fit the part of Eddie Boone?
I mean, when I read it, I thought of nobody else. I mean, he was the first person I was like, I got to get James Black to do this, because he brought he's got a very natural sort of charisma and chemistry with other actors, and he's athletic. He was formerly on the Cleveland Browns, had played football and this kind of stuff. So it just seemed like the perfect person to do that. And he had done such a great job in all these other crummy movies that we cast him in, like Zombie Cop and Chick Boxer and Maximum Impact and Galaxy of the Dinosaurs. And I just felt like, man, this guy could do so much better. And I just felt like he had sort of cut his teeth on these other movies and was ready to sort of carry the movie. And because that's really, I had to have somebody, whoever played that part was literally going to be like a partner in making of the movie, because he was going to carry it, from start to finish. He's in not every frame, but almost every frame of that movie. So it wasn't, I couldn't just pick just anybody. So, he was really one and only choice. If he hadn't done it, I'm not sure who I would have cast, because I didn't have a backup plan at that point. And it was just, the timing was fortuitous because he lived in Columbus, which is a couple hours south of Akron. So he would come up on the weekends or whatever. We shot it over a period of time. He would crash on my couch or whatever. I'd give him some gas money and feed him and all that kind of stuff. But he was, by the time he finished that movie, then I think he was looking beyond Ohio, as, like he wanted to go out to LA and kind of see if he could make a career of this, which he's had a very successful career as an actor. So that was kind of the one that I think we were both firing on the right pistons at that point, but, mutually to get that movie made.
You also make a cameo in the film as a police detective. What made you decide to be a part of the film?
I've always thrown in these cameos. When I first did it in The Dead Next Door, it was because it was a small role that for whatever reason, I kept casting other people and they kept bailing out on me. So I think by the third or fourth time of that happening, I just said, oh, the hell, so I can, anybody can play this. I'll just do it myself. And after that, it just sort of became a fun thing to do. It's like, everybody said, oh, like Alfred Hitchcock, you got to do your little cameos or whatever, because I'm not an actor and I don't necessarily like or feel comfortable being in front of the camera. But by the time we did Ozone, I'd already done this a number of times, and it just seemed like, oh, here's this little, thing. I'll just fill in as this guy. He doesn't really say anything. He just comes in and gets shot, and that's it. And then ironically, that was actually, I think, the first night of shooting. I think that was the very first stuff we shot. So I think it was more of a thing that, like, we'll just warm up with me, and my co-producer, Scott Plummer, we played the morgue attendant, which is the scene immediately before that, which was shot right after that on the same night. So I think it was just a way to do it. Like, we'll just ease into this without having to worry about having actual actors there. We'll just fill in as, these cameo roles. But it's something I eventually gave up because it's much like scoring music, which I've scored a lot of the movies that I've done in the early days, but it's just one of those things where you just kind of reach a point where it's like, okay, enough is enough.
Now, speaking on cameos, you recently made a cameo in James Edwards' film. Her name was Krista.
Yes, coming out of retirement.
How did that come about?
Well, he asked me, and of course, James Edwards goes back to, he was 11 years old when he was a production assistant on The Dead Next Door. So he basically grew up on my sets, essentially. He had been in he was the dead kid in the farmhouse in Dead Next Door. He was Scully in Robot Ninja. He had a very small cameo in Skinned Alive, and then it was, of course, in most of those shot on video things, as well as Ozone. So we had a long history together, and we had been in the trenches for a long time together. And so he asked me. He was making the movie, and he kind of was like, "I'd really, be honored if you would do this." And I kind of groaned, and I didn't really answer him at first because I hadn't done it in so long. I was just like, "Oh boy, and I really didn't know what he wanted me to do. I hadn't read the script. I didn't really know that much about the movie even at that point. But in the back of my mind, I was like, I can't say no to this guy because he's been there for me so many times that I would really I'd be an incredibly large, male sex organ if I didn't do it. I'd be a real dick if I didn't do this role. So I, of course I said yes and went up and did it. And it was fun. It wasn't, there was nothing like, too heavy about it, and it was kind of funny because I didn't realize when I shot it that I was basically like the last scene of the movie essentially. So it's like, oh, at least you put me in you gotta close with do the big finish, have me in the cameo. So, but it was fun. That was I think because we were talking about it that day of the shoot. I think that was not the only time, I guess, because we were together in Robot Ninja. I was trying to think. That was like one of the only times that we were actually on screen together. in some weird way out of all these movies, which is kind of funny.
Okay, let's get back to Ozone. What was it like shooting the film on Super VHS-C tapes?
Well, that wasn't a challenge because I had the 6-pack of movies, starting with Kingdom of the Vampire and ending with Humanoids from Atlantis. All those were shot with the exact same camera, the exact same lighting gear, all that kind of stuff. So I was already pretty well versed with that camera, and that was what I had essentially. I couldn't, because we were shooting Ozone on a pretty meager budget of like $3,500, so it wasn't like I could go, buy another camera even if I wanted to. So we were just trying to make the best with what we had. But the shoot itself was sort of interesting because where a lot of these things had been shot in a couple of weekends or just, whenever people were available, Ozone kind of went on. We started it in the summer of 92, I think. And we were still kind of shooting bits and pieces of it through until, it was finished in the about a year later in the summer. So I would edit scenes and, go back and shoot bits and pieces here and there, or, the effects and things like that. We were just constantly shooting this thing. So the one benefit of that movie that I had was my co-producer, Scott Plummer, had made a deal for us to shoot at this abandoned, well, not a semi-abandoned building on Edwin Shaw Hospital. And that we had shot some of Dead Next Door there early on. Dr. Molson's lab and things like that had been shot at the same location. But they basically just gave us the keys, and we went in and just set up shop, and we could literally just leave our equipment there, lock the door, go home. But we were there for a year, I think, till they finally said, hey, guys, we're going to use this building for something else. You're going to have to get out of there at some point. But it was kind of like, that was the closest to me to like having my own backlot. Like literally I had this whole place to myself to go in and out of these different buildings and all that kind of stuff. So that in that regards, it was great. But the one downside of making Ozone was because it came on the heels of these other 6 questionable quality movies, a lot of people had kind of lost faith or were like 1 foot from like sort of bailing out, pulling the ripcord and getting out of the whole thing. So a lot of the time it was James Black and I, or just a couple of other people. I mean, it was a very meager crew. I mean, when we started the first few days, I think we had a fair number of people there, but throughout the course of it, it was either people were working or had other obligations or just had lost interest or, whatever. I think a lot of people weren't sure that it was going to be anything special, and I basically was painting it as, no, this is going to be different than all these other ones. And they're like, sure it is. Nobody knew for sure. I think until they started seeing that there was extra care being put into the lighting and put into the camera framing, and just, that we were taking a little more time. We were doing more takes. We were doing all the things we didn't do on those other movies. Then I think people started to come around a little bit, but it had its share of challenges. But I mean, that was probably one of the easier shoots that I had, just because there were fewer people. The big problem with movies, unlike a painter with a canvas, you got to deal with a lot of people. You got to juggle schedules. You got to, try and get people to do what you want them to do or show up on time or whatever it is. And on Ozone, I just didn't, I wasn't dealing with as many people as I had on even on some of the earlier movies. So in that regard, it was just easier because I was, for all intents and purposes, making the movie by myself. I mean, I wasn't literally making it by myself, of course, but there were days when it was just James Black and I shooting, scenes from the movie. So it was smaller in that regard, and that was nice.
One of my favorite scenes in that film was the station restroom scene, where Eddie Boone experiences the effects of ozone for the first time. What was it like filming that scene, considering that was effects heavy?
That's actually an interesting scene, because the first part of it where he walks in, a big chunk of that scene, a lot of the insert kind of stuff, was actually shot by Matthew Jason Walsh as second unit. I mean, I was there and I was saying, yeah, we need a shot like this or shot. I actually was originally not happy with how that scene turned out, ironically. I just didn't feel like he got enough coverage, but he wanted to be groomed as a director and was looking to do it. So I said, here, you take some of this stuff and some of this stuff. And some of the bigger effects, like the actual head, where it morphs into the skull head and all that kind of stuff, that was shot probably months later. We went in and shot the opening stuff where he comes in and he's at the sink and all that kind of stuff, and some of the blood splatter and all that. But that actually, I mean, I think that scene works for what it is, but I that's the one scene probably in that entire movie that I wish I had gone back and gotten more footage for. I feel like it could have been even better. But I think it works with the sound effects and the music and all that kind of, everything just, it seems to all just come together. But I think it's a good scene because people are not sure that's the sort of the first case of like, wait, what am I looking at? He dreamed that, or did that actually happen? Or, that's when you sort of led down that path where you're just not even sure what direction that movie's going to go in then from that point.
Another scene that I liked in the film was the underground fight club scene, where Boone gets thrown into a underground fight. What was it like trying to shoot that scene in such tight of space?
It was tight of space because that was actually the basement of the that building in Edwin Shaw, which was used as the drug lord's den, and it was some sort of I don't know where we had originally planned on shooting that scene, but when I saw they had this long hallway that went down the entire length of that building in the basement, and they had these weird like gated rooms, and we didn't have to dress it that much. It kind of pretty much already looked the way it did for the most part. Just had to come in and light it or whatever. But it was, the challenge I think was just to try and sell the fight stuff, and to make it look bigger than it actually was. Now, I guess the thing that made that work to a large degree was James brought his half brother Paris in, and they had basically grown up together and had done fights like that in their backyard growing up, all the time. So they kind of knew what they were going to do, and we went over it a bunch of times, and to get all the moves or whatever. And then it was just kind of a logistical thing as far as, okay, we only had one camera, so I'm going to set the camera up at one end of the arena, I'm going to set a camera up at the other end of the arena, and then I'm going to go in and do a bunch of handheld stuff and grab bits and pieces. And that was one where it was really the editing is sort of what made it work, because I had multiple angles. I mean, there was probably more coverage of that one scene than there probably was anything else in the movie, I think. So I had plenty to work with. So then it was just a matter of picking the best bits, that were going to convey the action in the right way, I guess. The one thing that burdened me for years about that scene is, of course, they have those bladed axe handle, weapons or whatever. And of course, they're not really metal, they're cardboard. And so there was a number of shots where you could actually see, like, after they had been at it a few takes, the cardboard started to bend a little bit, and the light would catch it a certain way. And so in the VHS version, of course, there was nothing we could do about it back in the day. And if for the Blu-ray, I was able to, I went back to do the restoration, I was actually able to kind of go in and digitally remove some of those creases from it, so that you can, of course, probably still tell that it's cardboard. But if you're one of those people that count bullets in action movies and that kind of thing, then you could certainly spoil it still. But for me, I was like, okay, I can at least live with this now, where previously those couple of shots would just make me go ah. But that was a fun fun scene to shoot.
What was the process in bringing the drug lord on screen with all that makeup and foam that was used for the character?
I think the biggest challenge with the drug lord was the fact that the guy who was making the drug lord suit had done the front part of the head and basically the chest, maybe down to the shoulders or whatever. And then he kind of got busy and wandered off and did other stuff, and he just essentially bailed out on me. So it was one of those things where it's like, crap, now we have part of a suit, and now what are we going to do? So Bill Morrison, who was a guy that has been working with me from the beginning, and he's an old childhood friend that had done a lot of makeup effects, on short films and things like that years ago. He's we call him the MacGyver of makeup effects, because the guy can take a roll of duct tape and a stack of foam rubber and make just about anything, I think, out of it. And that was the case where he really saved my butt, because that's essentially what he did. He had to make the arms, the hands, the legs, the back of the head to try and sell this thing. Because we had, the front of it I thought looked pretty good, and the chest piece looked pretty good. It was just, building out the rest of the suit. And, we had done the artist who had done the head and the chest had done sketches of the thing, so we kind of knew, this is what it's going to look like. He's sort of more Toad-like, I guess, than anything else. But Jabba the Hutt, of course, is the one thing he always gets referred to as. But so we kind of knew what direction we were going, and it was just a matter of getting there. And then the biggest challenge with shooting that was, James Edwards was under this this suit, and when he would talk, if he talked normally, the mouthpiece, which was barely attached to him, just would hardly move at all. So I had to get him to over pronunciate everything, so that he was opening his mouth really wide just to get the drug lord mask to open a little bit so that it looked like he was talking. So that was a challenge, doing multiple takes of that, just to, and I'm sure for him as a performer, it's like the worst thing you can ask somebody. It's like, okay, don't worry about your performance, just worry about like opening your mouth wide enough to get this thing to move. And of course, he had to post dub his lines because that was all unintelligible. And on the Blu-ray now, actually, there's bloopers and outtakes reel where you can actually see what some of that ridiculous footage looks like with his, original location, what was recorded on location, the things we have to do to make these movies.
The film also has a great score from Jen C. Molar.
Yes, it does.
What made you want to bring him on to do the film score?
I had met a colleague of his named Steve Aquilina, who was from Germany, and he had, together with Andreas Schnaas, had made this Violent Shit series of films, or at the point, I guess it was just the one movie, but they had just done the sequel, the second one. And somehow Steve had met Yen in Germany somewhere looking for somebody to do music. And so when Steve came to America and was selling copies of the movie, he had a soundtrack CD, and I listened to it, and I was like, my gosh, this music is fabulous. It's like, this guy is very talented. I said, I told Steve, and I think Steve may have even said, he's looking for more scores, if you've got anything, if you're interested. And at that point, I, of course, was already working on Ozone and, thinking about what I was going to do. And the original plan, I think, I'd had Matthew Jason Walsh score some of the other shot on video movies we had done, like Zombie Cop and things like that. And he always did an admirable job. It was just, he was limited in resources, and, the music was more sort of retro kind of 80s style music, I guess. I mean, which fit at the time that we were making it, but I was looking for something much bigger. So the first test, I let Matt score the original Ozone trailer, and he really went like all out to try and make some sort of orchestral sounding score. And I think he did a good job. And I used it, of course, for the trailer, but I was still looking to go bigger. So, I wound up contacting Yen. I think our entire relationship was literally just faxes back and forth, because he was in Germany and I was here in Ohio, and we would just fax pages back and forth. And so he agreed to do it. And out of the $3,500 budget, I think close to $1,000 went in his pocket, because that was the biggest expense in the entire movie, biggest single expense. And so he got to work on doing it, and I don't remember how he even did it, because this was there was internet, but it was very bare bones. I think he was sending me stuff or playing. Maybe he was calling and playing me stuff over the phone. I can't remember. His English was not great, so there was a lot of issues there. But when I heard the score, I was just blown away. And when I put it against the picture, I was just, I don't think I gave him a single note. I was so happy with what he had done. He really had just breathed a whole nother life. I worked so hard to make the visual end of it look as good as we possibly could. And then just to kind of ladle in that score on top of it was, a dream come true. So that was a very fruitful experience, I think, for both of us.
The film has also a very good song at the end of the film called Into the Black. How did you come across this song, as this song really fit perfectly with the film's story?
Well, thank you. No, that actually was written for the movie, and that was Matthew Jason Walsh, and doing really what he's best at is writing songs like that. Now, there's actually two versions of it. On the VHS version of the movie, there's an earlier version with a different vocalist and a little bit weaker mix. It's just we didn't have the technological means to do it. But when I remastered the movie in 2002, by then he was working with a much stronger vocalist and had a much larger batch of equipment to really make it more powerful. So it's kind of funny that there's two versions of that song, but both of them are good in my opinion. It's the same song, it's just the way it's orchestrated and all that. But yeah, it fits in the movie because he wrote it for the movie. I think that was kind of his consolation prize, is he got to score the trailer and got to contribute that song. And he did a phenomenal job. It really closes the movie out very nicely.
How did you get this film onto Blu-ray? Because when I first heard the announcement, I was surprised because the way this film was shot.
Yeah, it's even on Blu-ray, it's still, I didn't upconvert anything. It's not HD, it's standard definition. it's just standard definition that, I went through and restored the entire movie. Now, I should point out that when my original plan of putting it on Blu-ray was just to take the existing remastered version that was done in 2002 and just put it out on disc with some other extras. And then I made the mistake of kind of pulling it up and watching it again because I hadn't seen it in so long. And I was just like, oh boy, this could look so much better. And oh geez, this doesn't look, it's like, what was I thinking? And so then it just became like, okay, how quickly can I pull all the original footage from the Super VHS masters and kind of rebuild the show and what can I do? And honestly, I wasn't prepared for the results that I got because I figured, the technology, even in the last 18 years since the last time I had touched this movie, had come a long way. But I was, between putting noise reduction on it to get, the problem was with the camcorder we shot it on had sort of its own inherent noise to it, and removing that noise and then kind of replacing it with a little bit more filmic looking grain made a huge difference. I mean, it just suddenly the image was cleaned up and the colors were brought more out of it. It was the earlier versions of the movie looked a lot more muted and that kind of thing. But really, I mean, it was getting the best master I could, and I didn't want to toy or monkey around with up converting it to HD because I have a 4K TV at home, and when I watch stuff that's even on DVD or whatever, it looks so much better than the stuff where I've up converted things, either through software or hardware. I don't know how they do it, but the TV manufacturers seem to have it, the magic worked out where you can up convert and it looks really nice. So my goal was just to keep it standard definition, keep it the way it was, at the frame rate it was shot, not do any monkeying around there. Just make it look as good as it possibly can, and then encode it for Blu-ray. The Blu-ray uses a different type of encoding, and it's much more efficient. And it's so you have all this extra space essentially on the disc because it's not HD source material. You can encode it very nicely where it looks really clean and crisp and all that kind of thing. And then matching that with the audio, we had a nice 5.1 mix that we had done in 2002, and I did a few tweaks to that and then encoded it in DTS HD, which is sort of the gold standard for Blu-ray for audio, and those two things made a huge difference. And then it was just throwing as many extras on there. I mean, a lot of people looked at me oddly, like, why are you putting this? But it was an experiment, to be honest, to see, like, would it be possible to do this extra effort on something that's just standard definition, is always going to be standard definition, and then put it on Blu-ray, and A, would it look good, and B, would people find it acceptable? And I mean, the reviews for it have been quite glowing, and I certainly satisfied myself in doing it. I think it's a really solid presentation of a movie that probably doesn't deserve to look that good. Given when it was shot and how long ago it was shot, we really were able to squeeze a lot more out of it than I even expected going into it.
How long did that take to complete?
I think I basically rebuilt the show and did most of a lot of it was color grading, just getting the color to really pop where it hadn't before. And there were certain scenes like in the morgue and things like that where we had shot under fluorescent lights, so that they always looked kind of greenish, and just to bring more color to the thing in general, because it was there. It was just bringing it out. But I think I spent maybe 2 or 3 weeks, probably 4 total between monkeying around. It wasn't very long, honestly. I mean, comparative to the Dead Next Door, Robot Ninja, and Skinned Alive, which all were coming from film scans and having to, we had to do a lot more. I mean, with video, there's only so much you can do, but it was probably the majority of that time was just spent trying to figure out what the process of what's going to, I have all these software tools at my disposal, but what combination of those is going to get the results that I want, because that was kind of new territory. I mean, I had done, restorations for film stuff, but for video was a little bit different story. But yeah, it honestly didn't take that long. That disc came together pretty quickly. I mean, part of that was because it was done during that whole initial quarantine, the whole COVID-19 thing, and everybody had stay-at-home orders and all that kind of stuff. And I work from home anyway, so it didn't really change my life too much. But I was able to sort of buckle down and say, okay, I'm going to work on this and get this done. And that probably certainly helped the fact that I didn't have anywhere to go or anything to do because there was, everything was closed. So I was able to just hunker down and get it done.
Today you have a company called Makeflix. How did that company come about?
Well, I had reached a point about 2 years ago where I just didn't see much of a future for Tempe as it was at that point. I mean, it had been a long time since I was making anything new, and it had really been a long time since I had distributed anything new because the market changed. I mean, back in the day, we had people like companies like Netflix that were very good supporters and would buy DVDs, and I had a foot in the door with them early on in the streaming days and all that kind of stuff. And just gradually over time, that kind of went away, and they had their own agenda and their own business model. And it just became like, if you weren't getting into companies like Redbox and Netflix and Family Video, let's say, because all the other video stores had gone, then you didn't really have a business. It was kind of difficult to do. And out of the sort of the ashes of that whole ruin, essentially came this whole market of the Blu-ray market, and the collectors, were chomping at the bit to buy, restored versions of their favorite movies and that kind of thing. And there was a whole new breed of collectors that were interested in having this stuff. So once I think I had done the Den Next Door Ultimate Edition first before I decided to do it. I was kind of midway through restoring Robot Ninja when I decided, you know what, this is going to be it for Tempe, and I'm just going to kind of move forward. Ironically, Makeflix was not, I didn't really know what I was going to do next. Makeflix was a web domain that I had bought probably 15 years ago with the intention of doing a filmmaking magazine. I had grown up in an era with magazines like Cinemagic and things like this that, where it was like kind of like how to make a movie kind of thing. And that was my original intention. I had published a magazine years ago called Alternative Cinema, and kind of was something I kind of wanted to always get back into. So I bought the Makeflix.com name just thinking, I'll one of these days I'll get around to doing a magazine, showing other people how to make movies. Well, of course, the magazine industry just, went up in flames. There's not much of a market there either. So I had the domain name still every year. I just kept renewing it and paying for it. And I thought, well, it's still a valid name for, So I decided once I closed up shop with Tempe, I said, well, I'm going to relaunch as Makeflix and kind of take a different approach to it. The Tempe model had kind of been two-pronged. I had done my own, I had my own releases, things that I had either produced or made or whatever. And then I had films that I had acquired from other people. And that was the part that I kind of didn't want to do. I didn't want to acquire movies from other filmmakers. I wanted to just, be in a position to maybe help other filmmakers get their movies out there and get them sold, but not necessarily be responsible for paying royalties and, all that kind of stuff that comes along with it, and show them how to do it, essentially, and let them put the stuff out. So that was kind of the basic business model, I guess, when I relaunched it as Makeflix. And it's, it's sort of like anchored by these bigger releases, like when I, have done Robot Ninja, now Skin Alive and Ozone, things like that. But it's grown, nicely. I mean, it's not something that's growing overnight, but I'm definitely seeing growth in the right direction, and it's finding an audience, and people are coming and liking the customer service, and we ship really quick and all that kind of stuff. So I try and put a lot more, customer service, I guess is the word, but yeah, try and make it a more customer service oriented business. But for these lower budget movies, try to, give other filmmakers an outlet, for my own stuff as well, of course, but, to find this stuff, and, the collectors are able to find it and buy it and not go broke in the process.
Will there be any more of your films released on Blu-ray?
Well, the current plan after Skin Alive Ultimate Edition, we're going to start shipping that next week. That's pre-ordering now on Makeflix. And after that, we had already kind of announced that I'm revisiting this old Cinema Home Video 6-pack, which is Kingdom of the Vampire, Zombie Cop, Chick Boxer, Maximum Impact, Galaxy of the Dinosaurs, and Humanoids from Atlantis, all gems, of course, but those 6 are scheduled to come out before the end of the year. Again, I'm going to kind of go back. I'm maybe not going to give them the extensive Ozone treatment, because most of those movies have already been remastered, but I am going to do some additional work on them and some cleanup work and things like that. And there's going to be new extras and really nice artwork for the first time. That those movies are going to have some awesome artwork. So those should be, it's kind of interesting again that movies like that would ever wind up on Blu-ray. And I'm sure some people are sort of tweaking their eyebrows going, oh, why would you even do such a thing? But I think Ozone, for one thing, has kind of proved to me that it can be done. I mean, it's not like other shot-on-video movies haven't been on Blu-ray, but they never really did anything special with them. They just took the existing master, stuck it on Blu-ray, and that's it. And, I'm trying to do more with them and try and really give the best possible presentation and kind of make it like an archival thing, like everything I could possibly find, throw onto these discs, for posterity. Like I'm treating it like it's the last time they'll ever be released on physical media, which may be the truth because I can't imagine there'll ever be 4K Blu-rays of any of these movies. So this may be it. But the one project I would like to do after that, which we'll see if it's realistic or not, is to revisit a science fiction movie I made in 1996 called Polymorph, and that was that one and the one that I produced after that called Bloodletting. Both of those movies, the way we did the original post-production was really like hackneyed and just they've never looked as good as the original source material looked. So what I would like to do is go back, rebuild the shows, give them the kind of Ozone treatment where we really clean them up and do a nice job with them. And so those two are probably would be the next ones in the queue. And then we'll see. I've still got a few movies in the catalog to kind of do this with.
One last question. Will you ever return to the director's chair?
I had a feeling that was coming. I had so many years where I was like, nah, I don't think so. I've referred to myself as semi-retired and all that kind of stuff. I guess, the biggest reason why I haven't up to this point. First, it was just kind of the market conditions weren't really right for it. After I had left Full Moon, which I was there for 5 years, I just kind of needed a break, and then that break just kind of got longer and longer and longer. And then I got remarried and had kids, and then it was about paying a mortgage and all that kind of stuff, and that's not really conducive to making movies per se. But I know people do it, of course, but at this level, it's financially not really viable. So maybe one of these days I try to take the Sean Connery approach now and say never say never. You never know what's going to happen. But I certainly have ideas of things that I would like to do, and I've got a lot of scripts that I never made that I always wanted to make that I would love to drag out and polish up and see get made. But I guess it kind of depends on how this goes. Right now I'm just kind of looking to clear the decks in some way, go back and polish up all these older films and get them looking at the best that they can and get them in the hands of the people that enjoy them, and then we'll see what happens after that. Once I've done all that, there's nowhere else to go probably, but either officially retire or make something new. So that we'll see which direction I go in, I guess, if I survive the restoring.
Well, JR, I want to thank you for coming on to my podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Have a good day and stay safe.
All right. You too, sir.
Every day there's a family struggling with hospital bills to care for their sick child who is fighting an illness. There's a woman who is fighting breast cancer and is having trouble making ends meet while paying for their treatment. And there are burn victims that are going through treatments to heal their deep wounds. There is a charity in the horror community that helps these people. Scares That Care is an organization that helps families deal with the bills for their child. They help women get the treatment they need to fight breast cancer, and they help people who are dealing with severe burns get the help they need to heal. Scares That Care is a 100% volunteer organization and 501c3 nonprofit charity that is dedicated to helping these people in fighting real monsters. To find out more information or to donate to Scares That Care, you can go to www.scaresthatcare.org. Every donation helps Scares That Care fight real monsters. For the latest news and information on Anthony T's Horror Show. You can check out Anthony T's Horror Show on these social media platforms at Anthony T's Horror Show on Facebook, Instagram, and the Slasher app, at Anthony T's Horror on Twitter. Anthony T's Horror Show can be found on YouTube as well at youtube.com/Anthony Thurber. You can find Doc Discussions on the web at www.docdiscussions.com, and you can find Anthony T's Horror Show on the web at anthonytshorrorshow.blogspot.com. What's Anthony T watching? A film that I never thought would come out on Blu-ray. No, I'm not talking about Ozone. I never thought that film would come out on Blu-ray. But it did. There was another film that also recently came out on Blu-ray that I literally gave up wanting to come on Blu-ray because I had this feeling that this film would never come on Blu-ray. But it has, courtesy of Lionsgate. Yes, Lionsgate. You know, the company I like to say that likes to hold their films hostage. Finally got around to releasing David Cronenberg's disturbing film Shivers. Now, this is a film that was released in 1975. The film was produced by Ivan Reitman. You know, the Ivan Reitman that directed Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 in the 80s. That Ivan Reitman. And yes, he did produce this film. The film stars Lynn Lowry, who a lot of genre fans will know from The Crazies, and Barbara Steele, who people know from various Italian horror films from the 1960s. This is a film that I've been literally waiting for it to come on Blu-ray because this is an excellent film. One of the reasons why this film is an excellent film is David Cronenberg's direction here. He does a very good job in really giving you this uncomfortable feel that what you are watching is very uncomfortable and disturbing at times, as it helped convey the horror that is going on in the film. Because this film has a lot of eroticism, but it's used in more of a horrific way, which really makes the scenes disturbing to watch. It's truly, I think, one of David Cronenberg's best films, period. And he's got a long filmography. The scenes are done in such a way that it really moves the pace of this film, as this film could have slowed down at any time. But it really doesn't. It's because of David Cronenberg's direction here. Because you need great direction to keep a film moving, even though most of the horror takes place in the second half of the film. Another thing that he really does very well is to get good performances from his cast, as I really thought the performances in this film were very good, including Paul Hampton's, Lynn Lowry's, and Barbara Steele's performances here, as they brought a dynamic that works very well with the tone of the film, especially the scenes with Paul Hampton and Lynn Lowry. I think those are some of the best scenes in the film. David Cronenberg really knows how to direct actors. It's shown time and time again in his films. This film is no different. He also does a very good job with the way that he handles the screenplay here. He makes sure that the main characters are developed very well here. Because this is a film where you probably have about 3 main characters, maybe 4 main characters. But Cronenberg does a very good job making sure each of the characters are interesting. You need interesting characters for a film with a tone like this film has to work so well. And Cronenberg really does that effectively with the screenplay. Another thing that I think he does it very effectively in the screenplay is the way he spaces out the horrific scenes in this film. Whether it's the gory scenes with the parasites or the eroticism that he uses as an element of horror, both of those are done effectively well to the point that you feel shocked with what's going on with the story. As the last half of the film is very bizarre, with all the violence and eroticism in it, and Cronenberg does a really good job making sure those scenes are effective, are scenes that you just can't take your eyes off, because it's just downright horrifying to look at. Especially the end of the film, which I'm not going to give away here, so you have to see the film yourself. It's a very disturbing film to watch. It's so bizarre and it's so violent. It is really one of the more bizarre films you will ever watch. And for the Blu-ray, I'm very happy that Lionsgate really put its time and effort into this Blu-ray release. Because there are a lot of extras. Because once I heard Shivers is going to be announced, I was thinking, oh, it's probably going to be a few extras, that's it. But no, there is a lot of extras on this Blu-ray, to my surprise. This film has like 2 audio commentaries, including one from David Cronenberg and one from co-producer Dan Carmody. New interviews featuring director David Cronenberg, actress Lynn Lowry, and special makeup effects creator Joe Blasco. Celebrating Cineplex, an interview with Greg Dunning, an archival 1998 David Cronenberg interview, still gallery, theatrical trailers, TV spot, and radio spots. This Blu-ray is loaded, and it's very surprising that this Blu-ray is loaded, considering that this could have been just a film where Lionsgate could have done the bare bones treatment for Shivers, but instead it gave it a true collector's edition release. And I'm very happy for it, because I never expected a Scream Factory type release with Shivers, but Lionsgate really delivered on the extras for this Blu-ray, as it's really packed with extras, which surprised me. Definitely check out Shivers. It's one of David Cronenberg's most disturbing films, and it's a film that will shock you. Thankfully, this film finally gets the proper Blu-ray release it deserves on the Vestron video label from Lionsgate. I'm just speechless that this is a great Blu-ray, because I was expecting a bare bones Blu-ray or something limited in extras, but they go all out here on this release, and I have to commend Lionsgate for that. Now, Lionsgate really has to do something for me. Since they finally released Shivers on the Vestron label, can you please finally release Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 on the Vestron label? Because I really want a Blu-ray of Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2. Please, can you guys do that? Thank you. Sorry about that. I really needed to lobby for that Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 Blu-ray. It's a very good film. I really love that film. I know a lot of people don't like that film. I love that film. There needs to be a Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 Blu-ray, and I will continue to lobby for that Blu-ray until the day I die. Enough with that. Upcoming episodes on Anthony T's Horror Show. Episode 51, I will have a guest. I don't have a guest announced at this time. Keep in tune to Anthony T's Horror Show on Facebook, the Slasher app, at Anthony T's Horror Show, and Twitter at Anthony T's Horror for a guest announcement. Episode 52 will be a best of episode, meaning I will be highlighting some of my favorite rants Plus, I will also include a couple of past Rock and Shock interviews, as usually in October I would be getting ready for Rock and Shock, but that convention is not happening anymore because it folded before all the crazy things that are going on in the world right now. But I do want to put a couple of interviews, as I really do miss that convention a lot. Expect a couple of interviews on the Best Of show, along with a couple rants, and the epic Veronica rant. New listeners to the show have not heard the 10-minute rant I went on for Glenn Danzig's Veronica. It's an epic rant on why Glenn Danzig's Veronica is the worst horror anthology film of all time, and quite possibly one of the worst horror films ever made, because that's up there as one of the worst horror films ever made. But I will re-air my review on that abysmal film in episode 52 as part of the Best of Auntie T's Horror Show. Episode 53 will be a regular show. I may have an interview or an open discussion, haven't decided on that yet, but that's episode 53. With that, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. Have a good day, stay safe, and support indie horror.